Hey everybody, Zach and Joe, your local Pittsburgh realtors. We're going to talk to you real quick about what happens on the day of closing and what is the day of closing. Let's start there. So the day of closing is the meeting of buyer and seller to actually transfer ownership. It's the last day that we usually tell you. The whole process takes about 45 days, give or take. Usually that's the 45th day. That's when we sit down, sign the papers, do all that stuff. But there's a lot that goes on before that. To get ready for that. Usually the first thing is the day before closing or the morning of, the sellers are either already 100% moved out or they're taking care of the last few things. Hopefully, we both have stories for other videos when that doesn't go as planned. But it's broom clean, as stated in the contracts, and really what that means is the seller gets all their stuff out. They don't have to have it professionally 100% clean, but it's don't leave any of your stuff. Don't leave big messes.
Don't say, hey, that old couch in the basement, they probably want that. Let's leave it for them.
Yeah, don't assume that buyers are just going to be okay with it.
Also, clean it up. Don't leave. I have a horror story of a customer, a seller who left probably 20 contractor bags of trash on the front lawn and said, well, the trash men will take it 2 or 3 days from now. It should be broom clean, like Zack said, and tidy. If you leave them touch-up paint, or you leave them, some extra siding if it has siding, or if you have extra flooring from the hardwood floors, those are normal things to leave behind. But leaving your personal items is usually a no-no unless you've asked ahead of time, hey, do you want this whatever item? And this buyer agrees to that, yes, they could use that and likes you to leave it.
So once you transfer ownership, anything left in that house, whether you wanted to leave it or not, as the seller, it then becomes the buyer's property, whether you meant to leave it or not. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the buyer will be reasonable and say, oh, you forgot this or that, come by and pick it up now, even though it would be technically the buyer's. So that's all the more reason for the buyer to do what's called the final walkthrough then. And that's usually the night before or the morning of closing, right before closing. And the purpose of that is to make sure the house is still the same as it was the last time the buyer saw it. Nothing crazy happened, no severe weather, no, the seller was moving out and dropped a couch and it broke a window, sort of things.
Pipe burst, which it didn't happen to me, but it happened to another agent in my office. A pipe burst overnight and destroyed the ceiling. Yeah. And they caught it at the walkthrough.
Yeah, and sometimes if a house is already vacant, no one would have known that. It's one thing if the seller's living there up until closing, but if it's vacant, all the more reason to go check for things like that.
Once you sign the papers and get the keys at the closing, if you go home and discover that a pipe burst, it's your issue, not the seller's any longer. That's the importance of that walkthrough.
That's the last thing you want to do, is take ownership of a property and immediately have to go fix something or deal with a mess or something. Once all that is done, though, most of the time, yes, everything's fine. It's a 5 to 10 minute process, depending on the size of the house. You walk through and make sure everything is how you saw it the last time. At that point, then buyer and seller and buyer's agent and seller's agent all meet up at a table just like this, and usually the buyer's agent or the seller's agent office. And there's a closing coordinator there. Sometimes it's the first time buyer and seller meet, and buyer's agent, seller's agent, first time they meet. So you exchange pleasantries, sign a bunch of papers. They're all explained, by the closing coordinator, and then the ceremonial, passing of the keys from one side to another, and then whatever else is pertinent to the house too, garage door openers, things like that should be left for the buyer.
any kind of idiosyncrasies of the house. Often the seller will say, hey, there's a switch in the garage. You may not know what it is right away. It's for the sprinkler system. Yeah. Here's my phone number if you have any questions about the house after you own it, things like that. And most of the time, closings are pretty jovial and everybody's happy. The sellers are getting their money. The buyers are getting a new house. So everybody's pretty happy and excited. On occasion, though, there are times when something goes wrong. And usually it's usually fixable. I won't say always, but usually fixable. And a typical example of things like that would be somebody's name spelled wrong on the paperwork. Another very common one is, as Zack mentioned before, about cashier's check. When you are the buyer and you're bringing your check, they will not accept a personal check for many thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
They want a cashier's check. And I've had people had to run to the bank in the middle of the closing and go get a cashier's check, or the bank wasn't open and the closing started at 9 a.m., so it held it up, things like that. But that's why the closing coordinator and the agents are there, is to help work through any problems. The reason why we mention that is closing usually takes about an hour, maybe less, but probably a good practice would be to take a half day at least off of work. If you know your closing's in the morning, take until noontime or vice versa. Because it seems like whenever there's pressure to get somewhere back to work by 11 o'clock, that's the day you have those little hiccups in the closing that drag it out.
Yeah, we don't want it to be a stressful event. This is the happy time of a transaction. It's everybody's sigh of relief. Somebody gets paid, somebody gets a new house. So we want it to be as enjoyable as possible. Put all that hard work to wrap it all up. So as we've said before, any more questions, call us, email us, leave a comment. But thanks for listening.